The rain-slicked streets of Busan gleamed under the sodium glow of harbor lights, where the Han River's murky waters lapped against concrete docks like a restless secret. Ji-hoon Kang stood at the edge of the warehouse pier, his black trench coat whipping in the salty wind, the faint hum of container cranes echoing in the distance. At 42, he was the unyielding architect of the Kang Syndicate, a network woven through shipping manifests, discreet ledgers, and the quiet enforcers who ensured every rival knew the cost of crossing him. But tonight, his mind wasn't on the latest shipment of contraband electronics slipping through customs. It was on the empty nursery, back at the family estate, where his 5-year-old son, Min-woo, should have been sleeping under the watchful eye of the nanny. The call had come at midnight, a burner phone buzzing on his nightstand, the voice on the other end frantic but clipped. "Boss, the boy's gone. Nanny's down, looks like a trank dart. We're sweeping the grounds." Ji-hoon's blood had turned to ice, not from fear. He'd long ago cauterized that emotion, but from the violation. No untouched family, not in his world. He'd mobilized the detail in minutes, 6 men in unmarked SUVs, radios crackling with guard rotations and perimeter checks. Now, as thunder rumbled over the river, he scanned the shadows, the air thick with diesel fumes and the metallic tang of impending storm. A splash shattered the tension, small, desperate, from the water's edge. Ji-hoon whipped around, his hand instinctively dropping to the concealed Beretta at his hip. There, half submerged in the churning river, a figure thrashed against the current. Not one of his men. A woman, her dark hair plastered to her face, arms straining to hold something, a child above the waves. Min-woo, his son. "Get her!" Ji-hoon barked into his earpiece, already moving, boots pounding the wet pier. 2 enforcers flanked him, their flashlights cutting through the downpour like accusatory beams. The woman was fighting hard, her breath's ragged gasps, the child's whimpers piercing the roar of the rain. She wasn't Syndicate. No training in her frantic strokes, just raw determination. As Ji-hoon reached the edge, she locked eyes with him, wide, fierce, unyielding, and shoved the boy toward the shallows with a final guttural cry. Enforcers hauled Min-woo out first, the boy coughing up river water, his small frame shivering in soaked pajamas. Ji-hoon dropped to his knees beside him, wrapping his coat around the child, murmuring low reassurances in Korean. "It's over, little one. Father's here." But his gaze flicked back to the woman, now clinging to a rusted piling, her strength ebbing as the current tugged at her legs. "Pull her in!" he ordered, voice like gravel. Hands reached down, gripping her under the arms, dragging her onto the pier. She collapsed in a heap, coughing violently, her simple blouse torn and muddied. Up close she was younger than he'd expected, mid-20s, perhaps, with sharp features softened by exhaustion, her black hair falling in wet strands that framed eyes the color of polished jade. "Who the hell are you?" Ji-hoon demanded, kneeling beside her as one of his men checked Min-woo's vitals with a portable medkit. The boy was bruised but breathing, a small miracle amid the chaos. She wiped water from her face, her voice steady despite the shivers. "Soo-jin Lee. I worked nights at the clinic across the river, saw the kid tumble in, looked like someone shoved him from that alley." She nodded toward the shadowed gap between warehouses, where shipping containers loomed like silent giants, grabbed a life ring from the dockside booth, and jumped. No time to call anyone. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. The clinic. He knew it, a nondescript urgent care that patched up low-level runners without questions. But her story rang with too much precision. The alley, the shove. His men would verify, but instinct told him she wasn't lying. Not yet. "You saved my son," he said flatly, the words carrying the weight of a vow. In his world, debts like that weren't forgotten. They were repaid, or collected. Soo-jin pushed herself up on trembling arms, glancing at Min-woo, who was now huddled against an enforcer's chest. "Just glad he's okay. Kids don't deserve..." She trailed off, her eyes narrowing at the circle of armed men, the subtle bulges of holsters under rain-slicked jackets. Realization dawned, slow and sharp. "You're not just some worried dad, are you?" A ghost of a smile touched Ji-hoon's lips, gone in an instant. "Get her dried off and checked," he told his second, Tae-sik, who nodded curtly. "And sweep that alley. Plates, cameras, everything." As they helped her to her feet, Soo-jin hesitated, her gaze lingering on Ji-hoon, with a mix of wariness and something unreadable. Gratitude, curiosity. In the underbelly of Busan, both could be dangerous. Back at the Kang estate, an imposing mansion perched on the hills overlooking the harbor, its walls lined with discreet security cams and motion sensors, Ji-hoon carried Minwoo inside himself, the boy's head lolling against his shoulder. The air inside was warm, scented with jasmine from the foyer diffuser, a stark contrast to the river's chill. Nanny was stable, the trank wearing off. She'd seen shadows, nothing more. But Ji-hoon knew better. This was no random snatch. Rivals. The Lee faction from Incheon, perhaps, testing boundaries after his latest port takeover. His mother, Yoon-kyung, waited in the sitting room, her frail form swathed in a silk robe, silver hair pinned neatly despite the hour. At 78, she was the syndicate's quiet anchor, her wisdom sharper than any blade. "Is he hurt?" she asked, voice soft but insistent as Ji-hoon laid Minwoo on the couch. "Shaken, but alive thanks to her." He jerked his head toward the hallway where Soo-jin was being led to a guest room for a hot shower and fresh clothes. Yoon-kyung rose slowly, peering through the cracked door as Tae-sik escorted the young woman past. Soo-jin's steps were steady now, though fatigue etched her face. Their eyes met briefly, Yoon-kyung's widening in a flicker of recognition that Ji-hoon caught from the corner of his vision. The older woman froze, her hand trembling as she pointed. "That girl. She looks like your late wife." Ji-hoon's breath caught, the room's warmth turning suffocating. His wife, Ha-yoon, gone 5 years now. Car accident, they'd said, but he'd always suspected sabotage. The resemblance was uncanny, the same delicate jawline, the quiet fire in her posture. But Soo-jin was a stranger, a clinic worker who'd plunged into the river for a child she didn't know. Yoon-kyung's words hung in the air, stirring ghosts Ji-hoon had buried deep. He turned away, jaw clenched, as the first clues of the night settled like rain on glass. Who had pushed Minwoo into the water, and why did this savior's face reopen old wounds? In the guest room, Soo-jin stripped off her wet clothes, the steam from the shower blurring the mirror. She hadn't mentioned the man she'd glimpsed in the alley, tall, hooded, slipping into a black sedan with plates half obscured by mud. A detail she'd share or keep. As the water cascaded over her, she wondered if pulling that boy from the river had just dragged her into something far deeper. The steam in the guest-room bathroom clung to the marble tiles like a veil, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus from the wall-mounted diffuser. Soo-jin stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in the plush robe provided by one of Ji-hoon's silent staff. Her muscles ached from the river's pull, but her mind raced sharper than ever. That hooded figure in the alley, his hurried retreat to the sedan, the way he'd glanced back just once, eyes glinting under the brim of his cap. Busan's docks were a maze of shadows, but something about the plate, ending in 47, mud caking the first digits, stuck with her. She wasn't one to chase trouble, but ignoring it felt like leaving a patient untreated. Down the hall, in the estate's dimly lit study, Ji-hoon poured a measure of soju into a crystal tumbler, the liquid glinting amber under the desk lamp's glow. The room smelled of aged oak and polished leather. Walls lined with bookshelves that hid safes and server racks, monitoring the syndicate's encrypted feeds. Minwoo was asleep upstairs now, sedated lightly by the on-call doctor, his small chest rising steadily under the nanny's renewed watch. But Ji-hoon's thoughts churned like the harbour tides outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, where distant ship horns cut through the night's hush. Tae-sik entered without knocking, his broad frame filling the doorway, rain still dripping from his coat. "Alley's clean of prints, boss. But we pulled footage from the warehouse cam. Grainy. But it shows a single figure, male, mid-40s, shoving the kid toward the edge. No clear face, hood up. Sedan peels out east toward the industrial spur. Plates partial, ends in 47. Running it through our contacts at the DMV now?" Ji-hoon nodded, swirling the soju without drinking. Lee faction. The Incheon rivals had been probing since he'd undercut their smuggling route last month. Fake manifests swapped for real cargo, a move that cost them millions. Possible or internal. Nanny swears she locked the side gate, but the trank was pro-grade, not street stuff. Tae-sik hesitated, glancing at the door. "The girl, Soo-jin, she's in the guest wing. Gave her clothes, tea, didn't push for questions yet." "Leave that to me." Ji-hoon's voice was low, edged with the authority that had built his empire from Busan's underbelly to the port's shadowed empires. He set the glass down, the clink echoing like a gavel. Debts in his world weren't abstract. They bound like chains. She'd saved Minwoo, pulled him from the Han's grasp when his own men were seconds too late. Repayment meant protection, whether she wanted it or not. Yun Kyung's words echoed in his skull, unbidden. "That girl. She looks like your late wife." Hyun's face flickered in his memory, her laugh in the estate's garden. The way she'd trace his scars with gentle fingers before the accident shattered it all. 5 years, and the official report still smelled of cover-up, brakes tampered, witnesses vanishing. Soo-jin wasn't her, couldn't be, but the resemblance gnawed, stirring a possessiveness he thought buried. He found Soo-jin in the guest sitting area, a cozy alcove off the main hall with velvet armchairs and a low table bearing a steaming pot of barley tea. She sat perched on the edge of a chair, dressed in simple black slacks and a sweater from the staff wardrobe. Too formal for her, but it hung well on her slender frame. The room's soft lamplight cast her features in warm relief, highlighting the subtle curve of her cheekbones, so achingly familiar. "You're still here," she said, not a question, her voice steady as she poured tea into a cup. The porcelain clinked softly, steam rising like a fragile truce. Ji-hoon took the seat opposite, his presence filling the space without effort. "It's late. Roads are flooded from the storm. Safer to stay." He watched her closely, noting the way her fingers tightened on the cup. Wariness, not fear. Good. Fear made people sloppy. She met his gaze, jade eyes unblinking. "Safer from what?" "That wasn't an accident tonight. I saw someone, tall, hooded, push the boy. Black sedan, plate ending in 47, headed east." Ji-hoon's pulse quickened, but his expression remained stone. She was observant, sharper than the clinic worker cover suggested. "You held that back from my men. Didn't know who to trust." She sipped the tea, the herbal bitterness grounding her. "Your setup screams organized. Security cams everywhere, armed escorts. I'm just a nurse patching up dock workers who fell on rebar." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. The faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood and steel, cutting through the tea's aroma. "And yet you jumped into a flooded river for a stranger's kid. Why?" Soo-jin shrugged, but her shoulders carried the weight of the night. "Moral duty, I guess, or stupidity. Grew up in these parts. Know the river takes what it wants. Minwoo's got your eyes. Reminds me of my little brother, before the currents got him young." The admission hung, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. Ji-hoon felt the pull, that rare crack in his armor. "The Kang family owes you. Stay through tomorrow. We'll verify your story. Get you home clean." She set the cup down, the porcelain meeting wood with a decisive tap. "Owe me. I don't want debts, just answers. Who'd target a child?" "Enemies." The word was clipped, revealing nothing, but inside gears turned. Her detail on the plate could crack the feed. "Rest, we'll talk more at breakfast." As he rose, Yun Kyung appeared in the doorway, her silk robe whispering against the floorboards. She'd been listening, her sharp eyes flicking between them. "Ji-hoon, a word." Her tone brooked no delay. In the hallway, away from Soo-jin's ears, she gripped his arm, frail fingers surprisingly firm. "She's no ghost, son, but the likeness. It stirs things. Ha-yoon would have done the same. Jumped without thought. Don't let old shadows blind you to new threats." He patted her hand, the gesture rare tenderness. "It's handled, mother, but keep watch on the boy, double the rotations." Back in the alcove, Soo-jin stared at the tea's cooling surface, ripples from a distant thunderclap distorting her reflection. She hadn't told him everything. The sedan's taillights had veered not just east, but toward the old Lee warehouse district, a place whispered about in clinic break rooms as rival turf. Slipping her phone from her pocket, she typed a quick note to her shift lead. "Out sick tomorrow. Family emergency." But as she hit send, a soft click echoed from the hall, a door locking or just the house settling. Upstairs, Taisik's radio crackled in the security booth, hidden behind a false panel. "Boss, DMV hit. Plate 47 matches 3 vehicles. One's registered to a Shell Corp, Lee Syndicate Front. We're mobilizing a tail." Ji-hoon acknowledged with a nod to the empty study. But his mind lingered on Soo-jin, protector or pawn. The night deepened, the estate's generators humming faintly, masking the subtle whir of cams tracking every shadow. And in the guest room, as Soo-jin finally lay down on the crisp linens, a faint vibration buzzed from her bag. The burner phone she'd glimpsed on the pier, now silent but insistent in her thoughts. Who had left it there, half buried in the mud? The morning sun filtered through the estate's heavy silk drapes, casting elongated shadows across the polished teak floors of the breakfast nook. The air carried the rich aroma of fresh rice porridge simmering on the sideboard, mingled with the subtle brine from the harbour below, where foghorns bleated like distant warnings. Ji-hoon sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture rigid as he scanned a tablet feed from the night's surveillance logs. Min-woo played quietly nearby, stacking wooden blocks under the watchful eye of the nanny, his laughter a fragile counterpoint to the tension coiling in the room. Soo-jin entered hesitantly, guided by a maid who bowed before retreating. She'd chosen a simple blouse and jeans from the wardrobe, practical, unassuming, but they couldn't mask the faint bruises blooming on her arms from the river's grip. Her hair, still damp from a quick rinse, fell in loose waves, framing eyes that scanned the space with clinical precision. The nook overlooked manicured gardens, ringed by high stone walls. Security cams discreetly tucked into the foliage like watchful birds. "Sleep well?" Ji-hoon asked, not looking up from the tablet. His voice was even, but the undercurrent of command lingered, like the low hum of the estate's backup generators. "Enough!" She slid into the seat across from him, accepting a bowl of porridge from the maid. The steam rose, carrying hints of sesame and ginger, grounding her in the normalcy of the meal. Min-woo glanced up, his small face lighting with recognition. "Auntie?" he said shyly, using the casual term that tugged at something maternal in her chest. Soo-jin smiled faintly, spooning porridge. "Feeling better, Min-woo? No more swims today." Ji-hoon set the tablet aside, the screen's glow fading to reveal his sharp features, high cheekbones etched with faint scars from old turf wars. "My men confirmed your story. Clinic shifts, no priors. The alley cam caught the shove. Same figure Tasik described. We're tracing that plate." She nodded, her spoon pausing midair. The burner phone weighed on her mind. She'd found it in her bag that morning, tucked into a side pocket like an afterthought. No label, just a cheap flip model, screen cracked but functional. It hadn't rung, but the presence felt deliberate, a loose thread in the night's unraveling. East toward the industrial spur. That's Lee territory. Old warehouses, easy to vanish into. I've treated their runners. They're sloppy with wounds. Always the same tattoo on the forearm, a coiled dragon. Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise breaking his composure. She knew more than a dockside nurse should, her words laced with the quiet authority of someone who'd pieced together whispers over late-night shifts. You make observations like that often. In my line, you learn to spot patterns. Infections don't lie. She met his gaze steadily, the push-pull of autonomy clashing against the invisible walls of his world. Gratitude warred with caution. She'd saved the boy out of instinct, not to barter for a seat at this table. Yet here she was, entangled in a web of favors and threats. Yun-kyung shuffled in then, leaning on a carved cane, her silk hanbok whispering against the floor. The older woman's eyes lingered on Soo-jin, that same uncanny recognition from the night before softening her stern expression. Join us, child. Family eats together. She settled beside Minwoo, ruffling his hair, but her free hand rested on Ji-hoon's arm, a subtle anchor reminding him of the codes that bound them. Protect the innocent, honor the debt. As plates were cleared, Tae-sik appeared at the French doors, his face grim under the morning light. He leaned in, voice low for Ji-hoon's ears only. DMV pinged back. The sedan's shell corp traces to Lee's front, abandoned yard on the spur. We sent a scout, places torched, fresh accelerant, no bodies, but they bolted fast. And boss, partial manifest from the port logs. Someone tampered with our shipment last night, swapped crates, delayed the unload. Looks internal. Ji-hoon's fist clenched under the table, knuckles whitening. Betrayal from within. A guard rotation skipped, or a ledger entry fudged. The Lees weren't just probing, they were infiltrating, using the river incident as cover to hit his supply lines. Double the estate perimeter. No one in or out without my say. Soo-jin caught the exchange, her instincts flaring. Trouble already? She kept her tone neutral, but the air thickened, the garden view suddenly feeling exposed, like the walls themselves could whisper secrets. Ji-hoon turned to her, weighing the risk of pulling her deeper. Possessiveness stirred, not just for the debt, but for the echo of Ha-yoon in her resolve, a ghost that made autonomy feel like a threat. Stay close today. The Lees don't forget faces. Yours was in the wrong place. She bristled, setting her cup down with a soft clink. I'm not hiding. If it's retaliation, I can handle my own exits. Independence clashed against his code, the loyalty he demanded like oxygen. But Yun-kyung interjected softly, wisdom isn't running blind, dear. We've lost enough to rivers and rivals. The conversation halted as a distant rumble echoed, not thunder, but the growl of engines approaching the gates. Tae-sik's radio crackled. Convoy inbound, boss. 2 tails, unmarked vans circling the hill road. False alarm or the first jab? Ji-hoon rose smoothly, signaling his second to the window. Outside, the garden stirred with enforcers melting from the hedges, hands near concealed weapons. Soo-jin stood too, heart quickening at the shift. The burner in her bag vibrated once, silent but insistent. She slipped it out under the table, flipping it open. A single text, time-stamped from the alley. Watch the mother. Dragon rises. Her blood chilled. Lee's symbol aimed at Yun-kyung, or a plant to sow distrust. As the engines faded, scouts confirming no breach, Ji-hoon turned back, his eyes locking on hers with newfound intensity. What is it? He asked, reading the tension in her stance. She hesitated, the phone burning in her palm. Share it and bind herself tighter to his orbit, or pocket the clue, risking the fragile trust. The estate's chimes tolled the hour, masking the whir of a drone overhead, syndicate surveillance or a rival's eye. In the underbelly of Busan, every shadow held a choice, and Soo-jin's next words could tip the scales toward alliance or isolation. If you're enjoying this story so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Sujin's fingers tightened around the burner phone, its plastic edges digging into her palm like a warning. The text glowed faintly on the cracked screen. Watch the mother. Dragon rises. The dragon, Lee Syndicate's mark, coiled and venomous, inked into the skin of every low-level enforcer she'd stitched up at the clinic. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, louder than the estate's chimes, fading into the garden haze. Ji-hoon's gaze bored into her, expectant, the morning light sharpening the lines of his face into something predatory yet restrained. "Nothing," she said finally, snapping the phone shut and slipping it back into her pocket. The lie tasted bitter, like oversteeped tea, but trust wasn't a currency she spent lightly. Not with a man whose world reeked of control, where debts bound tighter than handcuffs. Just a work reminder, shift stuff. Ji-hoon's eyes lingered, assessing, but he nodded once, turning back to the French doors where Tai-sik murmured into his radio. The engines outside had idled to a stop. False alarm, a delivery truck veering off course in the fog-shrouded hills. Still, enforcers fanned out along the perimeter walls, their footsteps crunching gravel like distant gunfire. The air in the nook grew heavier, laced with the sharp tang of adrenaline beneath the porridge's fading warmth. Yun-kyung broke the silence, her cane tapping the floorboards with deliberate rhythm. Enough shadows for one meal. "Min-woo, show your auntie the koi pond." The boy brightened, scampering over to tug at Sujin's hand, his small fingers sticky with jam. She let him lead her outside, the glass doors sliding open to release the brine-scented breeze from the harbour below. Ji-hoon watched them go, his mother's words from the night before echoing, old shadows blinding him to new threats. But as Sujin stepped onto the stone path, her posture straight and unyielding, he felt the pull sharpen, autonomy clashing against the code that demanded he shield what was his. The garden was a fortress disguised as serenity. Manicured hedges clipped to hide motion sensors, a koi pond fed by a recirculating stream that masked the hum of underground generators. Min-woo knelt at the water's edge, pointing at orange flashes beneath the surface. "They swim fast, like boats." The boy's voice was a balm, innocent amid the estate's veiled dangers. Sujin crouched beside him, forcing a smile, but her free hand brushed the pocket where the burner lay heavy. Watch the mother. Yun-kyung, frail but fierce, a target, or a ploy to fracture alliances before they formed. From the nook's window, Ji-hoon's view framed them like a painting. Sujin's laughter light, echoing Hayun's in the sun-dappled afternoons of years past. He clenched his jaw, shoving the memory down. Focus on the logistics, the torched warehouse, the tampered manifest. Tai-sik had pulled more from the port logs overnight. Discreet ledgers showing a forged entry, cargo swapped for decoys, timed with Min-woo's fall. Internal rot, perhaps a turncoat in the guard rotations, feeding intel to the Lees. And now this drone whir, faint but persistent overhead, its silhouette cutting through the morning mist like a mechanical vulture. "Boss," Tai-sik said, joining him at the window, "our jammer's up, but that bird's circling too close. Not ours. Frequency's off. Could be a hobbyist or eyes for the opposition." Ji-hoon's hand dropped to his side, instinct drawing him toward the garden. Get a team on it. Shoot it down if it dips below the tree line. He stepped outside, the gravel shifting under his polished shoes, the air alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant lap of waves against the distant docks. Sujin looked up as he approached, her expression guarded, Min-woo oblivious as he tossed pebbles into the pond, ripples spreading like secrets. "Enjoying the view?" Ji-hoon asked, his tone casual, but his eyes scanned the sky, catching the drone's glint against the sun. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans. "It's peaceful. Deceptive, though. Those walls aren't just for pretty fences. Her words carried an edge, probing his defenses as much as the estate's. Independence flared in her stance, a refusal to be coddled, even as curiosity tethered her here. Gratitude for saving Minwoo warred with the fear of entanglement. She'd glimpsed enough in the clinic's back rooms to know Mafia debts came with hooks. He stopped a pace away, close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo, clean, herbal, cutting through the garden's damp earth. Deception keeps us alive. The Lees torched their own yard to cover tracks. Your plate detail helped, narrows it to their inner circle. Sujin's gaze sharpened. Good. Then I'm done here. Drop me at the clinic. I've got patients who don't vanish into alleys. Autonomy pushed back, but her eyes flicked to Minwoo, softening the resolve. The boy splashed water, giggling, a fragile bond pulling against her flight instinct. Ji-hoon's voice lowered, possessive undercurrents threading through. Not yet. That drone's no coincidence. Stay, or you're a loose end they'll tie off. It wasn't a request. In his code, protection was non-negotiable, forged from Ha-yoon's loss. A vow to never let innocence slip through cracks again, but suspicion lingered. Was she truly just a nurse, or a plant with that burner's secrets? Eun-kyung appeared at the garden door, her cane steadying her as she called out, "Ji-hoon, the study, your contact's on the line." Her eyes met Sujin's, a silent acknowledgement passing, resemblance or not. The older woman saw the fire, the same unyielding ethics that had defined Ha-yoon. Inside the study, Ji-hoon took the encrypted call, Tae-sik patching in feeds from the perimeter cams. The voice on the other end was gravelly, a port informant. Manifest discrepancy confirmed. Guard on the midnight shift, names Park, clocked in, but logged a fake rotation. Vanished after. Last pinged near the Lee docks. Burner signal, dead now. Betrayal crystallized. Park, a decade loyal, turned by cash or coercion. Ji-hoon's fist tightened on the receiver. Find him. And the nanny. Cross-check her alibis again. The room's oak panels seemed to close in, the air thick with the hum of servers whirring behind false bookshelves, pulling data from hacked DMV logs and rival chatter. Outside, Sujin lingered by the pond, Minwoo now chasing butterflies along the path. The drone buzzed closer, dipping low enough to skim the treetops before a sharp crack split the air. Tae-sik's suppressed shot from a rooftop perch. The machine spiraled, crashing into the hedges with a metallic whine, its camera lens shattering on impact. Enforcers swarmed the wreckage, extracting a micro SD card still warm from flight. Sujin's heart hammered as she scooped Minwoo up, carrying him toward the house. The crash echoed like a gunshot in her mind, pulling her deeper into the fray. Back inside, she found Ji-hoon emerging from the study, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Park's the leak," he said flatly, no preamble. "Sold the kids' routine to the Lees. They wanted leverage, a message." Her stomach twisted. "And the river a sloppy hit to frame it as an accident? Or draw me out?" He stepped closer, the space between them charged, loyalty versus suspicion crackling like the storm's remnants. "That burner in your pocket. Hand it over." She froze, the jig up. Pulling it out, she flipped it open, showing the text. Ji-hoon's eyes darkened, reading the warning. "Planted on you at the pier. They're watching closer than I thought." Eun-kyung, overhearing from the hall, paled. "Me? Why?" "Distraction," Ji-hoon muttered, pocketing the phone. "Or bait. Tae-sik, escort mother to the safe house. Tunnels under the east wing now." The older woman nodded, gripping her cane, but shot Sujin a look of quiet solidarity. As enforcers guided her away, the estate's underbelly stirred, hidden doors hissing open, the faint echo of footsteps in concrete passages. Sujin faced Ji-hoon, the push-pull intensifying. "I'm not bait, let me go or use me, but don't cage me here out of ghosts." Her words struck at his code, Ha-yoon's echo fueling the possessiveness, even as her independence challenged it. He held her gaze, the air humming with unspoken vows. "You're under my protection now, whether you fight it or not." But as Tasik radioed in, Park spotted, fleeing toward the old shipyards. The real question loomed. Was the leak caught, or just the first layer of a deeper betrayal? The safe-house tunnels beckoned, shadows lengthening as noon sun pierced the windows, and Sujin wondered if sharing the text had forged an alliance or sealed her fate in the rising dragon's coils. The estate's east wing corridors narrowed into a labyrinth of polished concrete, the air turning cooler and damper as hidden panels slid shut behind them with a pneumatic hiss. Sujin followed Ji-hoon down the dimly lit stairs, her footsteps echoing off walls lined with emergency conduits and flickering LED strips that cast long, wavering shadows. The faint scent of mildew clung to the space, undercut by the metallic tang of reinforced steel doors, remnants of the mansion's wartime bunker origins, repurposed for syndicate safe houses. Minwoo clung to her hand, his small palm damp with nerves, while Taisik brought up the rear, his radio murmuring low updates from the perimeter teams. "Stay close," Ji-hoon said over his shoulder, his voice a low rumble that blended with the distant hum of ventilation fans. His broad frame led the way, the black shirt stretched across his back, absorbing the light like a void. Possessiveness radiated from him, not just in the clipped orders, but in the way his eyes flicked back to ensure she hadn't lagged, a code etched deep, born from Hayun's ghost and the night's violations. But Sujin felt the cage tightening, her autonomy chafing against the invisible leash of his protection. She'd shared the burner text out of necessity, not surrender. Now, every step deeper into these tunnels felt like trading one current for another. They emerged into a compact safe room, bare walls reinforced with ballistic plating, a cot, a stocked med kit, and a bank of monitors cycling feeds from external cams. Kyung was already there, settled on a folding chair, with a blanket over her lap, her cane propped nearby. The older woman's face was pale but composed, the lines around her eyes deepening as she nodded to Sujin. "The tunnels are old, but they hold secrets better than men," she said softly, a wry smile cracking her resolve. Minwoo released Sujin's hand to toddle over, burying his face in his grandmother's side. Ji-hoon activated the main console, screens blooming to life with grainy footage, the garden wreckage where the drone had fallen, enforcers bagging shards of plastic and circuitry. "Park's signal went dark 10 minutes ago," he told Tasik, who leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Shipyards are a rat's nest, cranes, derelict hulls, perfect for a handoff. If he's meeting Lee contacts, we'll have eyes on the water approach." Sujin paced the small space, her sneakers scuffing the grated floor. The monitor's glow highlighted the bruise on her forearm, a purple bloom from the river's grasp. That text, "Dragon Rises," it's not just a warning, it's a signal. "Lee's been quiet since your port takeover. This feels coordinated, like they're flushing you out." Her voice carried the precision of clinic diagnostics, piecing symptoms into a pattern. Fear gnawed at her edges, loyalty to Minwoo pulling her in, suspicion of Ji-hoon's world pushing back, but she wouldn't cower. Growing up in Busan's fog-choked alleys had taught her that running only delayed the flood. Ji-hoon's gaze met hers in the console's reflection, a spark of reluctant respect flickering amid the tension. "You're right. The manifest swap was no accident. Park logged the fake rotation, but someone higher signed off. Behavioral tell, he skipped the nanny's check-in that night. Claimed a blackout glitch. He tapped a key, pulling up a ledger feed, timestamps misaligned, a guard rotation gap of 12 minutes. Human error or deliberate sabotage? The air thickened with the whir of cooling fans, mirroring the churn in his gut. Her insights sharpened the blade, but drawing her deeper risked exposure. Autonomy was her armor, and cracking it could shatter the fragile trust forming between them. Tasik's radio crackled sharply. "Boss, visual on Park. Old Dry Dock, Section 7. He's with 2 suits, Lee ink on their necks, exchanging a drive. Looks like data stick. We're in position, but they've got a boat idling, props churning the muck. Ji-hoon's jaw set, the room's confines amplifying his coiled energy. A hold for intercept. No shots unless they bolt. He turned to Soo-jin, the possessiveness surging like a tide. You and Min-woo stay here. Mother too. This ends clean. But Yun-kyung rose unsteadily, gripping the chair arm. No, son. If it's betrayal, it touches us all. Ha-yoon taught me that. Family isn't hidden away. Her words struck like a subtle betrayal of his own code. Loyalty to the past overriding prudence. Soo-jin stepped forward, heart pounding against her ribs. I'm not staying buried. If Park's the leak, he might have eyes here. Tunnels could be compromised. Independence flared, her ethics clashing with his control. She wouldn't be sidelined while threats circled the innocent. Min-woo's wide eyes darted between them, sensing the storm. A muffled thud echoed from above, distant like a door slamming in the wind. The monitors glitched briefly, static snowing across one feed, the estate's main gate, where shadows shifted unnaturally along the wall. Tae-sik cursed under his breath. Perimeter breach? No, power flicker. Backup's holding, but someone's jamming the outer cams. Ji-hoon's hand went to his hip, drawing the Beretta with fluid grace. Infiltration. Tae-sik, seal the access points. We're extracting topside. The safe room's lights dimmed fractionally, the generators kicking in with a groan that vibrated the floor. Outside, the harbor fog rolled thicker, muffling ship horns into ghostly wails. They moved as a unit, Yun-kyung supported by Soo-jin, Min-woo hoisted into Ji-hoon's arms. The stairs upward felt endless, each step laced with the creak of settling concrete and the acrid whiff of ozone from strained electrics. Emerging into the east wing hallway, the estate had transformed. Blackout curtains drawn, enforcers posted at corners with suppressed rifles at the ready. The air hummed with tension, radios whispering guard rotations gone haywire. Ji-hoon handed Min-woo to a trusted lieutenant, then pulled Soo-jin aside into an alcove, his grip firm on her elbow, not bruising, but unyielding. "This isn't your fight," he murmured, close enough that she caught the sandalwood edge of his cologne amid the chaos. "But if you run now, they mark you. Stay with me." Her breath caught, the push-pull electric. Fear of his world versus the autonomy she clung to, loyalty to the boy she'd saved, testing her resolve. "I'm not running, but don't mistake gratitude for obedience." Their eyes locked, a charged silence broken by Tae-sik's urgent call. "Park's convoy moving, 2 sedans, heading your way, 5 mics out." As alarms whooped softly, deliberate false alarm or real. Ji-hoon released her, the moment fracturing like glass. Enforcers hustled them toward the garage, tires screeching in the distance like approaching thunder, but in the alcove's shadow, Soo-jin spotted it. A faint scuff on the baseboard, fresh as if a boot had dragged something heavy. A tell, internal sabotage lingering, or had Park's allies already slipped inside, turning the estate into a trap? The garage doors rumbled open, revealing armored SUVs idling in the gloom, and as they piled in, the question burned. Would the intercept at the shipyards claim the traitor, or draw the dragon's fire straight to their door? The armored SUVs roared out of the estate's garage like shadowed beasts, tires biting into the rain-slicked drive with a guttural growl that echoed off the high stone walls. Ji-hoon rode shotgun in the lead vehicle, his Beretta holstered, but his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the armrest, the leather creaking under the pressure. The air inside was thick with the scent of gun oil, and fresh coffee from insulated mugs passed among the enforcers, a ritual to sharpen edges before blood spilled. Soo-jin sat in the back with Min-woo on her lap, the boy's head nodding against her shoulder, lulled by the engine's vibration. Yun-kyung flanked her other side, the older woman's hand clasped in hers. a quiet alliance forged in the tunnel's chill, where words had failed, but shared resolve hadn't. Taisik drove, his eyes flicking between the rear view and the encrypted tablet mounted on the dash, pulling live feeds from spotters along the hill roads. Park's convoy split, one sedan looping south to the shipyards, the other cutting east toward the old rail yards. Boats still idling at the dock, props kicking up foam like they're waiting for a drop. The words came clipped, laced with the static hum of the radio, linking their team to the intercept unit. Outside, Busan's midday fog clung to the winding roads, sodium lamps from the harbour district bleeding hazy orange through the mist, turning the world into a smeared watercolour of greys and golds. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened, the scuff mark in the alcove replaying in his mind. A boot print too fresh, too deliberate, suggesting someone had lingered after the drone's fall. Internal betrayal layered on Park's defection, a guard rotation compromised, perhaps, or a maid with a second phone. His code demanded swift excision, but prudence whispered caution. Rushing the traitor could flush out more rats. "Take the shipyard route," he ordered, voice like gravel over the engine's thrum. "Flank them from the waterside. No loose ends." Possessiveness coiled in his chest, not just for the syndicate's integrity, but for the fragile unit in the back seat. Min-woo safe, Hyun-kyung shielded, and Soo-jin. Her presence a thorn and a tether, echoing Ha-yoon's unyielding spirit, even as it challenged his control. Soo-jin shifted, feeling the weight of Min-woo's trust against her, his small breath steady despite the convoy's speed. The SUV's tinted windows framed flashes of the city, derelict warehouses squatting along the Han River's edge, their corrugated roofs rattling in the wind, the distant clang of container hooks swinging cargo like pendulums. She'd glimpsed enough in the clinic, patients with dragon tattoos muttering about the boss's move after Ji-hoon's port takeover, to know the Lees played long games, using debts and diversions to erode empires, but being pulled into the heart of it ignited a fire. Autonomy versus the loyalty she'd unwittingly pledged by saving the boy. "That scuff in the hall," she said quietly to Ji-hoon, leaning forward. "Not from your men. Too light like a woman's heel. Check the staff logs." He turned slightly, his profile sharp in the dashboard glow, surprise flickering before respect settled. Observant, already on it, Tae-6 running access codes from the East Wing cams. The admission bridged the gap between them, her independence sharpening his strategy rather than fracturing it. Yet suspicion lingered. The burner text had come through her hands, and though he'd dismissed it as a plant, old wounds from Ha-yoon's sabotage made every ally a potential shadow. The convoy crested a hill, the shipyards unfolding below like a rusted graveyard, skeletal cranes looming over derelict hulls, half sunk in the muddy shallows, the air outside thick with diesel fumes and the briny rot of low tide. Tae-6 veered onto a service road, gravel spitting under the tires as they paralleled chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Radios crackled. Visual on the sedan, Parks in the passenger seat, two heavies up front. Boat's crew signaling. Looks like a handoff envelope, not the drive. Ji-hoon's hand rose, signaling the intercept team via earpiece. "Box them in. Quiet takedown." The SUVs fanned out, engines cutting to an idle hum as enforcers spilled onto the pier, shadows melting into the fog. Soo-jin watched through the window, heart pounding in sync with the waves slapping pilings, the metallic tang seeping through vents. Min-woo stirred, whispering, "Are the bad men gone, Auntie?" She squeezed his hand, ethics clashing with the reality. This world devoured innocence unless guarded fiercely. A muffled shout pierced the mist, Park's voice panicked, followed by the scuffle of boots on wet concrete and the zip of zip ties. Tae-6's team dragged the men aboard the lead SUV, Park's face bloodied but defiant, his eyes widening at Ji-hoon's silhouette. It wasn't personal, boss. They had leverage. Debts from Incheon. The kid was just to rattle you, draw you out for the real hit. Ji-hoon's response was ice. Leverage ends with you. He nodded to an enforcer who secured a hood over Park's head, the fabric muffling his pleas. But as they bundled the captives, a low rumble built from the river, a speedboat surging from the fog, its props churning white foam, Lee enforcers at the rails with rifles glinting. "Ambush!" Tasik barked, diving for cover as shots cracked the air, pinging off the SUV's reinforced panels like hail. Chaos erupted, enforcers returning fire in controlled bursts, the acrid bite of cordite filling the pier. Ji-hoon shoved open the door, shielding Soo-jin and the others as he fired back, the Beretta's recoil a sharp jolt against his palm. "Get them to the rally point!" He yelled over the din, waves crashing louder now, masking the boat's approach. Yun-kyung clutched Min-woo, her cane forgotten, while Soo-jin scanned for an exit. A service ladder to the lower docks, perhaps, away from the crossfire. But as the speedboat veered closer, a figure on deck raised a launcher, flare, or worse, the fog swirling like smoke from a staged fire. Was Park the bait, drawing the Kangs into a kill zone, or had the scuff mark signaled a deeper mole, turning the intercept into a trap? The boat's engine roared, closing the distance, and Ji-hoon's world narrowed to the next breath, the next shot, with Soo-jin's fierce gaze at his back, a reminder that some debts demanded everything. If this tale already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more hidden stories to light. The speedboat's bow cleaved the fog like a knife through silk, its engine snarled, drowning out the pier's chaos in a thunderous crescendo. Salt spray misted the air, carrying the sharp reek of gunpowder and engine oil as bullets whined past, ricocheting off rusted shipping containers stacked like forgotten tombs along the dock. Ji-hoon crouched behind the SUV's flank, his Beretta steady in a two-handed grip, each shot precise, cracking the windshield of the approaching vessel, forcing the helmsman to swerve. The reinforced panels of their vehicles hummed with impacts, a staccato rhythm that vibrated through the chassis, but held firm against the Lee enforcer's assault. "Flank left!" Ji-hoon barked into his earpiece, voice cutting through the din like a blade. Enforcers peeled off in pairs, using the derelict hulls for cover, their suppressed rifles spitting controlled bursts that stitched the boat's rails. One Lee gunman slumped over the gunwale, his dragon tattoo stark against bloodied skin, but the launcher-wielding figure braced against the roll, sighting down the tube. Flare or grenade, either could turn the pier into an inferno, igniting spilled fuel from the idling props. Soo-jin pressed Min-woo and Yun-kyung lower in the SUV's rear, the boy's whimpers muffled against her shoulder, the older woman's breaths ragged but resolute. The vehicle's interior reeked of sweat and fear sweat, the leather seats slick under their palms. Her mind raced, clinical instincts overriding panic, assess, act, adapt. The service ladder she'd spotted earlier, bolted to a piling 20 feet starboard, led to a lower catwalk, away from the crossfire, but crossing open water meant exposure. Autonomy screamed to move, to shield them without waiting for orders, yet loyalty tethered her to Ji-hoon's fray, the debt of the river pulling her deeper into his shadowed code. Tae-sik gunned the engine, the SUV lurching forward to ram a crate barrier, buying space. "Boss, they're prepping to board. Grapples incoming." His words crackled over the radio, drowned by the boat's roar as it hooked a sharp turn, hull scraping a buoy with a metallic screech. Ji-hoon fired again, the recoil jarring his wrist, but his eyes flicked back to the vehicle, Soo-jin's face framed in the tinted glass, fierce and unyielding, a mirror to Ha-yoon's last stand in his fractured memories. Possessiveness surged, not as chains, but as fuel. She wouldn't fall here, not on his watch. "Cover me!" Soo-jin shouted to no one in particular, shoving the door open a crack. Yun-kyung gripped her arm, eyes wide with the wisdom of decades in this world. "Child, the water's no friend today." But Soo-jin shook her head, spotting the launcherman's angle shift, a clear shot at the convoy. "Stay down. I've got the boy." She scooped Min-woo tighter, then lunged out, using the SUV's bulk as shield. her sneakers slipping on the wet concrete as she bolted for the ladder. Bullets chipped the piling inches from her heel, the sting of near-miss raising gooseflesh on her arms. Ji-hoon saw the dash, his heart seizing. "Soo-jin, back!" But she was already climbing, rungs slick with algae and spray. Min-woo's arms locked around her neck like a lifeline. The catwalk groaned under their weight, a narrow grate suspended over churning black water. The Han's undercurrent tugging at the supports like greedy fingers. From this vantage, she had a view, the boat closing, 3 Lee men leaping to the pier with grapples biting into wood, their advance a coordinated push, Park's intel feeding their timing, no doubt. Below, Ji-hoon pivoted, squeezing off rounds that dropped one boarder mid-stride, the body splashing into the shallows with a hollow thud. Taesik's team pressed the assault, but the launcher fired, a flare arcing high, bursting into blinding magnesium light that seared retinas and cast the yard in stark, hellish glow. Shadows warped, enforcers momentarily disoriented, the air shimmering with heat haze. Ji-hoon shielded his eyes, cursing the tactical feint, Lee's way of sowing chaos, buying seconds for the remaining gunmen to close. Up on the catwalk, Soo-jin ducked behind a rusted stanchion, the flare's afterimage burning purple spots in her vision. Min-woo's face buried in her neck, his tears hot against her skin. "It's okay, little one. Auntie's here." But her voice trembled, the push-pull tearing at her. Independence driving her to this perch, yet fear for the Kangs, Yun-kyung exposed in the SUV, Ji-hoon in the thick of it, testing her ethics like never before. She scanned the boat's deck through the glare. A partial manifest, fluttering from a loose panel, stamped with Kang syndicate codes, stolen logistics, confirming the port sabotage. Park hadn't acted alone. This was faction warfare. Riverside hits masking deeper infiltrations. The radio in Ji-hoon's ear buzzed frantic. "Boss! Second boat inbound. North Channel. Armed to the teeth. Park's talking. Says the scuff was from a maid. Lee's plant inside the estate. She's got access codes for the tunnels." Betrayal layered on betrayal. The internal rot festering like an untreated wound. Ji-hoon's code cracked under the strain. Loyalty demanded purge, but prudence screamed extraction. He glanced up at the catwalk, Soo-jin's silhouette etched against the flare's dying light, and felt the ghost of Hyun whisper, "Protect what matters, even if it costs the throne." "Pull back to the rally SUVs," he roared, covering their retreat with suppressive fire. The Berettas slide-locking empty. Enforcers dragged the hooded Park toward a side vehicle, his muffled protests fueling the fury. The first boat listed, holed and smoking from return fire, but the second silhouette emerged from the fog, a larger trawler, deck crawling with shadows, engines churning the muck into froth. Soo-jin descended the ladder in a controlled slide. Min-woo clutched tight, landing with a jolt that jarred her knees. She sprinted back, enforcers forming a wedge around her as they piled into the convoy. Taesik floored it, the SUVs peeling out in a gravel-spraying arc, headlights cutting swaths through the mist as they raced for the hill roads. Gunfire trailed them, sporadic pings on the rear armor, but distance grew. Inside, breaths heaved. The cabin, a pressure cooker of adrenaline and unspoken reckonings. Yun-kyung reached across to squeeze Soo-jin's hand, her frail fingers steady. "You moved like her, Ha-yoon. Quick, no hesitation." Ji-hoon twisted in his seat, eyes locking on Soo-jin's, the flare's echo still dancing in his irises. "You shouldn't have—" But she cut him off, voice raw. "And leave you to the flames. Debts go both ways." The words hung, autonomy yielding to a forged bond, suspicion dissolving in the heat of survival. Yet, as the convoy crested the rise, a tail light flickered in the rear view, unmarked van, hugging the curve too close. Lee's pursuit, or another layer of the mole's design? The estate loomed ahead, its lights a false beacon, and Ji-hoon wondered if the safe-house tunnels would shield them, or lead, straight into the dragon's maw. The convoy barreled up the serpentine hill roads, engines straining against the fog's damp embrace, tires humming over cracked asphalt slick with residual rain. Ji-hoon's SUV led the pack, its headlights slicing through the mist like accusatory beams, illuminating glimpses of rusted guardrails and the Han River's distant shimmer below. The air inside crackled with tension, the faint ozone scent from the flare's aftermath clinging to their clothes, mingling with the metallic tang of spent casings rolling underfoot. Min-woo had dozed off again, his small form curled against Soo-jin's side, but her eyes stayed fixed on the rear view, where the unmarked van's taillights flickered like a predator's eyes, too persistent, too calculated. "Shake them," Ji-hoon ordered Tae-sik, his voice a low growl over the radio's static. The second-in-command nodded, downshifting hard into a hairpin turn, the SUV fishtailing briefly before gripping the curve. Enforcers in the trailing vehicles reported the same, the van mirroring their moves. No overt aggression, but closing the gap with the precision of a tail on a shipping manifest. Logged, anticipated. Park's interrogation would wait. The hooded traitor in the back cargo hold muttered denials through his gag, but his eyes betrayed the depth. The maid, Ji-un, a Lee plant embedded for months, her access codes feeding real-time layouts to the rivals. The scuff mark, the jammed cams, it all traced to her subtle behavioral tells, a limp feigned to excuse late-night wanderings. Soo-jin's hand rested on Min-woo's back, feeling the rise and fall of his breaths, a steady anchor amid the chaos. The push-pull gnawed at her, autonomy urging her to demand a drop-off at the clinic, away from this vortex of vendettas, yet loyalty to the boy she'd pulled from the river, to Yoon-kyung's quiet solidarity, held her fast. "That van's not random," she said, leaning forward, her voice cutting the cabin's hum. "Plate ends in 92. Lee runner I patched last year. Knife wound from a turf scrape. They're not pursuing. They're herding you back to the estate." Ji-hoon's head snapped around, his gaze locking on hers in the dashboard's glow. Respect sharpening the edges of his suspicion, the ghost of Hyun fading against her unyielding insight. Herding for what? The tunnels? His code flexed, possessiveness yielding to strategy. She'd saved them on the pier, now her words could avert a trap. Yoon-kyung murmured agreement, her cane tapping the floor like a metronome of caution. "The dragon doesn't strike alone, son. Flush the nest." Tae-sik veered onto a side spur, a gravel access road flanking the estate's rear perimeter, the van's lights veering to follow. Radios erupted. "Boss! Estate cams show movement. East wing, 2 figures inside. Maid's badge pinged the safe room door 30 seconds ago. Betrayal's cost crystallized. Exposure." The heart of the Kang legacy laid bare. Ji-hoon keyed the console, overriding the main gates with a backup code, the wrought iron barriers grinding open just as the convoy surged through. Shots cracked from the van, suppressed, probing, pinging off the SUV's rear as Tae-sik floored it toward the garage. They piled out into the underbelly shadows, enforcers fanning into defensive positions, the air thick with the garage's oil-slicked chill and the distant rumble of generators straining against a deliberate overload. Ji-hoon scooped Min-woo from Soo-jin's arms, the boy's eyes fluttering open in confusion, while she supported Eun-kyung, the older woman's steps faltering on the concrete. "Tunnels, reverse the flow," Ji-hoon commanded, leading them toward a concealed panel. But alarms wailed softly. Tampered, a looped feed masking the breach as footsteps echoed from the east corridor. Ji-un, flanked by 2 Lee intruders, their dragon tattoos stark under sodium lights, burner phones in hand, sinking the assault. "End of the line, Kang," Ji-un spat, her voice laced with months of pent-up resentment, a ledger of coerced debts fueling her turn. She held a compact pistol, steady despite the tremor in her stance, the intruders advancing with rifles trained. The garage's overhead doors rattled, the pursuing van screeching to a halt outside, more shadows spilling in. Tension peaked, the environment turning hazardous. A blackout flickered, plunging corners into inky voids, sparks from a shorted conduit arcing like warning flares. Ji-hoon shoved Minwoo behind a tool rack, drawing his Beretta in a blur, firing a warning shot that shattered a fluorescent tube overhead, glass raining like brittle ice. "You sold us for scraps," he growled, his code unyielding. Never harm the innocent, but traitors earned no mercy. Tae-sik tackled one intruder, the scuffle a blur of grunts and thuds, while Soo-jin pulled Yun-kyung toward the panel, her free hand snatching a fire extinguisher from the wall. Autonomy surged. She wasn't waiting for rescue. Swinging it like a club, she cracked it against Ji-eun's wrist, the gun clattering away, the maid crumpling with a cry. Human error, overconfidence in her infiltration. Enforcers poured in from the flanks. A coordinated extraction turning the tide. Zip ties on the lees. The van's driver subdued outside by perimeter teams, but victory bit deep. A stray round grazed Ji-hoon's shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt in a hot bloom. Exposure's price. He staggered but stood firm, pressing a rag to the wound as Tae-sik cuffed Ji-eun, her confession spilling. The Lee's full plan. Organized hits on shipments and family to fracture the Kangs. The river shover feint to expose vulnerabilities. Park's data stick, retrieved from the shipyards, held manifests proving the sabotage. Rival factions' logistics unraveled, but at the cost of trust shattered within. In the safe room's dim glow, later, as medics triaged under the ventilation's steady hum, the revelation settled like harbor fog lifting. The threat was real, a web of betrayals woven through guards, maids, and forged ledgers, but dismantled by vigilance and unlikely alliances. Ji-hoon sat beside Soo-jin on the cot, Minwoo dozing between them, Yun-kyung's hand on his knee, a quiet vow kept. "You didn't have to stay," he said softly, his voice roughened by pain. The wound bandaged but throbbing, a sacrifice mirroring Ha-yun's loss, yet forging something new. Soo-jin met his eyes, the push-pull resolved in the reflective hush. Independence tempered by found family, ethics aligning with his restrained power. Debts aren't cages, they're choices. He nodded, a rare smile ghosting his lips. Commitment unspoken but binding, a pledge to protect, not possess. Their worlds entwined against the tides, the estate's lights steadied, generators purring back to life, the adventure's scars outlasting the spoils, loyalty etched deeper than any ledger, memories of rivers and flares binding them. Chosen family rising from Busan's shadows stronger than before. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of loyalty, danger, and found family. See you in the next story.